right now, I just want to hand over to Joledo, who will begin introductions for us. Joledo, go ahead.
Hello, so nice to meet you. I'm Sebastian Sonntag. I am the CEO of Global Bitcoins. And yeah, my Global Bitcoins goal is, of course, to provide the P2P services in all around the world. And our key markets are, of course, in Latin America and Africa. Personally, I'm really interested about kind of seeing out new products, new services we can introduce, especially for the African market. And I'm also very interested about kind of the use cases and why people are using use cases and what kind of issues they are solving with the Bitcoin. But yeah, I'm much looking forward for this panel. Thanks.
Beautiful. Okay, last but not least, we also have Victor joining us in Harare. Victor, go ahead, do your introduction.
Hello, everyone. I'm Victor. I'm the founder and CEO of Flex Fintechs, developers of Flex ID, which is a self-sovereign identity digital wallet designed to foster financial inclusion across the African continent. So our platform allows individuals to set up their own SSI wallets, which then give them access to banking platforms, crypto exchange platforms, etc., whilst remaining in control of their data. So really, one of the major exciting things that we're working on is integrating digital identity into the broader crypto community, whether it's for P2P or with local exchanges and other regional exchanges. So looking forward to having.
Beautiful. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is why I personally think this is going to be the most amazing panel for this entire Crypto Fest for 2021. I mean, we have the CEO of Paxful, we have the CEO of Local Bitcoins, and we also have the CEO of Flex Fintech. So, to jump straight into this, let me begin with Sebastian and Joledo on this matter. We've seen the fact that P2P on the African continent has really grown massively. Joledo, perhaps I'll begin with you. Why do you think this has become so popular on the African continent to the point where Nigeria and Kenya are leading this?
Yeah, of course, Nigeria and Kenya, especially Nigeria, is a really large market with a lot of users in there. And then again, the population is actually very educated. And but I think that the one key thing, and of course we started early on in Europe, and I start story from there. So even though they are the early adopters for Bitcoin in Western worlds, but the thing is that the financial sector is pretty efficient, and there are many banks and financial organizations already existing, of course, in the European market. So kind of the use case for Bitcoin, at least what I have seen in the Europe, it's mostly about kind of hodling and hoping kind of the price to search. But then again, when we actually monitor the African market, it's a bit different. There are kind of real financial use cases today already. Of course, everybody knows the remittance, and I think that we will discuss a lot about that topic today as well here. But it's always kind of storing value against the inflation and so on. And, well, of course, there's not too much of inflation. Okay, they are like 3% this year for European Union. But still, it's so low, so it doesn't really make sense to use it here, at least for that purpose. But it's a bit different story in Africa.
Right. Let me bring in Victor. Victor, I mean, you are the CEO and co-founder of Flex Phoenix. And what our audience may not know is that the fact that Flex Phoenix is changing the identity, it's seeking to change the identity rather of 400 million Africans, and they're doing this through their blockchain algorithm known as Algorand, and through their flagship problem, Flex ID. Victor, given that background that I've just given of what you and your company do, I'd love to know the P2P that you're seeing, the transaction that we're seeing, a lot of that is using personal data. It's using data that's related between you and I and the users. And in this day and age, we know how sensitive personal data is, especially after we've seen the scandals of people's identity being leaked. How would you say what would you say is the best way to keep the system in check, to keep the P2P platforms in check as well when it comes to this?
Yeah, definitely. So the background to our founding really stems from when I personally was attempting to open a bank account and I was failing to provide basic credentials such as my proof of residence, etc. And I then realized immediately that this is a problem that hundreds of millions of Africans are facing. Now, the shift to crypto in Africa has been nothing short of phenomenal because we are essentially leapfrogging traditional financial infrastructure. However, in doing so, it's best that we don't continue some of the worst practices of traditional banking. And these include strenuous KYC processes that limit millions of Africans that work in the informal sector from being able to access these services. So in Africa today, there are various platforms that are still inaccessible due to the difficulties of performing this KYC. And in the world of P2P, what essentially is important is to implement what we term self-sovereign identity wallet. This means that the individual is strictly and fully in charge of their personal data. But what's more impressive with this technology, normal informal traders are using.
Go on, Victor.
Perfect. Yeah. So what's more impressive with what's happening with P2P is normal traders that are now using platforms like Paxful or like local Bitcoins as a full-time job, really, are now able to actually generate their own crypto statements to be able to prove in the real world that their crypto trading activities actually serve as a stream of income. So it will be possible in the future for you to go to a microfinance and borrow based on your activities on local Bitcoins or your activities on Paxful. And this is only possible using your digital ID, which is self-sovereign and highly secure.
Right. Let me bring in Sebastian. Sebastian, what do you think? What would you want to see when it comes to securing personal data for people, especially with the growth of the P2P platform? We were just talking about how personal data is becoming more and more popular with the growth of the P2P platform, and how the best way to make sure that we are protecting this. What would you like to see coming out of that? How to protect that even as the P2P platform is growing?
Yeah, hey, this is actually a really kind of a tricky thing, especially looking from the European perspective, because we have two really kind of strict regulation here. One is the GDPR, so the privacy, storing of private information of the customers. The other one is, of course, the AML, so fighting against the money laundering. And of course, because of the AML, companies, financial organizations have to collect the KYC data and actually very detailed information about the customers. But then again, the GDPR and the privacy regulation, it forces that the company shouldn't be collecting too much information. They should kind of secure all this data and so on. And these two regulations are really competing heavily now in European Union. And this is also fairly kind of complicated companies like local Bitcoins, and I would guess that also for you guys. But yeah, I see much of a pride that there is this GDPR regulation, and the European Union really wants to kind of regulate how companies are collecting information and what kind of information they are collecting. Now let's see. The AML and the whole compliance thing is a fairly new thing in the European Union, and it has kind of going bit overboard in the late time, and we are collecting a lot of information. But I believe that we have to strike a balance between kind of this collection of private information and then, of course, between the privacy of the customers.
Right. Let me listen to Victor's point of view. Victor, come in, and here's the thing, Victor, with the growth that we are seeing around the cryptocurrency space on the African continent, what policies would you like to see coming from government, especially on the African continent, that will favor the P2P economy? Given more so right now, we as the human race, as the human culture, coming from about 2 years of a pandemic, millions of people across the African continent have lost their jobs. What government regulations would you want to see around the P2P economy to help it really grow?
Yeah, so one of the major things that really needs to happen across Africa, even in my country, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, is this, lifting of bans of valuable off-ramps for individuals conducting crypto transactions. Mobile money is one of the biggest forms of transactional platforms on the continent, and restricting people from being able to cash out their earnings from crypto trading or from being able to receive remittances such that they can turn their Bitcoin into spendable fiat, that they can buy groceries, they can pay for school fees, etc. That really needs to be lifted, because that policy is one making Africa lag behind when Africa has the highest volumes of P2P trading in the entire world. So we should be building on top of those numbers instead of creating this stolipin necktie kind of scenario and this cat and mouse game where central bankers and crypto startups are going back and forth. So we need far more inclusive and far more innovative approaches to take advantage of the rampant innovation on the continent. I think our young people are some of the most active crypto participants in the world, and they really deserve policies which can make them competitive globally. So that's one of the major things I would definitely want to see coming from our central bankers.
Beautiful. I mean, Joledo, I really want to bring you in. Before I bring Joledo back in, there's a question here from Lisa Johnson, and it's being directed specifically, I guess, to Sebastian, given that Sebastian is the CEO of Local Bitcoin. So, Sebastian, I'll let you answer this. Sebastian, you're being asked, are large cash transactions something you see often on localbitcoins.com? Please answer that one, Sebastian. It's a question from the audience before I can hand over to Joledo. Sebastian?
Was it a large cash? Was it related to cash? Sorry, I didn't hear the exact wording.
Come again? I repeat the question for you.
Yeah, if you can reread. Was it about the cash transaction, large cash transaction, or what was that?
Yes, Lisa Johnson on the audience, who's in the audience, asks, are large cash transactions something you often see on localbitcoins.com?
Yeah, the cash rates were actually banned already like 2 years ago, so we don't really see cash if we are really talking about kind of tangible cash and coins. We don't anymore have those because of those AML reasons. But I don't know if this is actually a large kind of Bitcoin transaction. I'm not entirely sure what is the kind of the question relating to. But we don't anymore have a cash transaction on the platform.
All right, no problem. That was a question from the audience members. We have still a few minutes, ladies and gentlemen, so I'll encourage you to also give us any questions or comments on the Q&A section right there. But right now, I want to also get over to Joledo. Joledo, here's the thing. We saw the Central Bank of Nigeria launch their own digital currency, the e-Naira. What effect do you think that this will have on the P2P trading? Joledo, are you there? Do we have Joledo with us? All right, we seem to be missing Joledo in terms of his network doesn't seem to be too clear. So I'll throw it over to Victor and Sebastian to answer that question. Gentlemen, we are seeing how central banks around the world, and right here was given the example of Nigeria, central banks not so long ago were against cryptocurrencies. And right now, as we speak, a number of countries around the globe, China, and we're being more specific here in Africa, Nigeria, are launching their own digital currency. What effect do you think this will have on P2P trading, Victor?
Yeah, maybe I can start. So what I've actually read, and also with e-Naira, also the European Union has kind of similar ideas. And one of the limiting factors here is that the wallets cannot be made by individuals or consumers. And they are only meant for kind of virtual as a service provider, such as local bitcoins or Paxful or such. And I see this a limiting thing, at least for the use cases. But of course, we are monitoring the situation. It's really interesting to see where the kind of the development's heading, and we are really hoping that the central banks will introduce kind of real cryptocurrency that are peer-to-peer, but let's see.
All right, Victor, what are your thoughts on that? How central banks around the world are now launching their own currencies. What that effect will have on P2P trading?
Yeah, so I think Africa, when it comes to P2P, it really pioneered with the use cases of mobile money and mobile banking solutions. So a CBDC isn't something that gives us a dramatic shift in terms of how users actually use these platforms. For the most part, it's actually coming to a market that is well more when it actually comes to P2P services. However, what's important to realize and be cognizant of is if governments are going to do CBDCs, they need to do them in a way which do not, sort of put lipstick on a pig, which is what we are currently seeing right now. It's more of a jump to get into CBDCs, but in reality, the fundamentals of central banking that have caused runaway inflation in places like Zimbabwe and Nigeria have still not changed. So this is giving governments the ability to either add more zeros or to remove more zeros whenever they see fit. And that doesn't really solve the problem that traditionally crypto is trying to address. So, governments really need to take it a bit more seriously and, launch CBDCs, not from a political perspective, but from a perspective of trying to actually solve the problems people are facing on a daily basis.
Wow, I love that. Not from a political perspective, but from a perspective that is solving day-to-day problems. Okay, here's the thing, Sebastian. Sebastian, you're there. I was reading one article that reads, the headline of the article, Sebastian, reads, cryptocurrency adoption in Africa is unprecedented. And the person who said this was the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey. That was in regards to how Africa will definitely be defining the future when it comes to a Bitcoin one. Do you agree with that, Sebastian? Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I really see that the Africa, but I also see that the Latin America is also another market where kind of the finance sector currently is fairly weak. Also, the finance ecosystem is weaker than, for example, in US or Europe. And I really see that the use cases and the users, they will grow in Africa. They will not grow in Europe or US.
All right, fantastic. But Victor, here's the other thing that when we're having the P2P conversation, I think we also need to be honest about with ourselves, is that how do we move the P2P service from just what one would call a privilege system where the middle class and the upper class are getting to use it. If you have Wi-Fi, if you have internet, if you're lucky enough to even have a smartphone. So the people who are using the P2P platforms that we talk about, Paxful, M-Pesa, local Bitcoin and so forth, are people who are the upper class and middle class. But how can we move that to making sure that people on the lower part of the economy are also benefiting from this? For example, our grandmothers and our grand-aunties and uncles in the village can say, they can also use P2P platform to help them buy electricity, buy water, sell their goods if they're farmers and so forth. How do we move it away from just a middle class and upper class commodity to bring it down really to the economy scale?
Yeah, definitely. We definitely faced that initial challenge when we were building out our digital identity platform. And one of our first iterations was to build it on top of WhatsApp. Why? Because WhatsApp is one of the most popular forms of communication across the African continent. Even my grandmother, she's over 80 years old now, but she knows how to actually use WhatsApp. We also have other interfaces that are very popular in Africa, like USSD. However, these are controlled by our telco carriers and they come with excessive charges, especially to startups. So it comes back to the issue of, one, governments actually decriminalizing the off-ramp accessibility of crypto solutions. If I can send you my Bitcoin using USSD without the need for internet connectivity, that would be absolutely perfect. But Africans have always innovated. The use of agent networks in Africa is one of the most impressive use cases of distribution in the world. So you can essentially build agent models that extend even to rural areas. And a good example I like to give is, if you go to a rural area, you will never fall short of finding Coca-Cola. You will always find some person selling Coca-Cola in the most faraway place ever. So how does Coca-Cola extend its reach that far, deep into some of Southern Africa's deepest roots? We have, in the crypto community, we have to learn and adopt and build on top of such infrastructure, such that we are able to even perform offline transactions using point of sales, using feature phones, etc., such that we don't leave those people out. There is no point in building an elitist financial system whilst preaching financial inclusion for the billions. We can't do that, as that will essentially shoot ourselves in the kneecap. So we definitely need to build on top of that existing infrastructure. And again, our policies to align to the realities that majority of our people are offline, they're in rural areas, they're in the informal sector, and they do not have iPhones. So it's imperative that we as a community build those solutions, but whilst also pushing our policy to align to that reality.
Okay, so Theo here says that CBDC will always be a way for government to control our funds. Okay, so gentlemen, we are left with exactly 5 minutes before our session ends. I will give Sebastian and Victor a chance to give their closing remarks. Sebastian, what are your closing remarks? Perhaps it could be the excitement of what future trends you're seeing on how Africa will be continue to being a leader in the P2P trading platform. As you give us your closing remarks, then I'll come to Victor. Sebastian?
Yeah, at least currently, and now I'm not looking too far in the future, I'm just looking at the current status. So one of the biggest use cases for Bitcoin in Africa is remittance, which I mentioned early on. So kind of transferring value cross-border. And usually, of course, it's tied to the kind of relatives. There's an immigration, different countries, and people want to transfer value from one country to another. And the banking system is fairly slow. It's really expensive. For example, if you want to transfer funds, for example, in Europe from Finland to some country in Africa, it usually can go as high as 20% of the sum you are transferring, and there are also kind of constant fees in there. With Bitcoin, okay, we know blockchain takes like 10 minutes, and it most likely less than kind of few percents you are losing from the money you are sending. So that is definitely a use case which makes completely sense already today with Bitcoin.
Beautiful. Victor, what are your closing remarks?
Yeah, so one of the most exciting things that I see in the horizon is definitely taking P2P transactions, not just in the crypto world, but now translating that value into the real world. Like I said, for majority of young Africans, they are actually getting into P2P as a full-time job due to some of the high unemployment you find in most countries. So, definitely we're excited to build tools that will enable these individuals to then translate that activity into the real world to be able to actually, access credit and build, then build their wealth, really. So, it's exciting to work with companies, hopefully like Local Bitcoins or Paxful, etc., to really make this a reality. So, yeah, those are my closing remarks. This was pretty great.
That's fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being part of this conversation on P2P trading platform on CryptoFest 2021. Joledo, who is the Senior Manager and Growth Partnership at Paxful, his network was a bit off, but we really thank you for also joining the conversation. Sebastian Sonntag, the CEO of Local Bitcoins, thank you so much as well for joining us. And Victor Mapunga, the CEO and co-founder of Flex Phoenix. My name is Zindzi Kibiku. Thank you so much to Sonia and her team for allowing for this conversation to happen. And I'm looking forward to conversations in the future. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.